Okay, we're on page 7. Britain in the late 20th century. Okay, so when Russell was writing, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. So Margaret Thatcher was our first female Prime Minister. Before that, it was thought that there was, only a man could do that job, and she changed that. So that just demonstrates another change in social attitudes of Britain during that time. So during the 1970s, Britain's traditional industries such as coal mining and shipbuilding were in decline because they were inefficient and struggling to keep up with foreign competition. Britain was suffering from a recession and unemployment was rising. So there's lots of underlined words here that you might need to research. Traditional industries. Traditional industries means that they had been going on for as long as they can remember. So traditional industries, mining and shipbuilding, Willie Russell would be able to resonate with that because that's what a lot of people did in his area in the northwest of England. However, they were in decline. That means that people were changing what they were buying. Things like coal mining, new houses were being built with gas fires or electric fires and not necessarily coal fires. Trains were changing from steam trains, which is burns coal, to electric trains because they were inefficient and struggling to keep up with foreign competition. So foreign competition would mean things like other countries could build ships cheaper than that they could be built for in the UK. And coal mining, so like I said, coal was being used less and less, and also people could buy possibly coal cheaper in a different country. And Britain was suffering from a recession and unemployment was rising. So a recession is where the economy isn't doing so well, and unemployment, people were getting laid off because they didn't need as much coal, so they couldn't dig as much coal, so people were being laid off. So at this time you might need to do your own little bit of research about these different words to help with your understanding. So Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in 1979. She believed that Britain's traditional industries weren't economically viable anymore and decided to close them down. So because they weren't making that much of a profit, she said, right, forget it, we'll just close them down and we'll save our money. But remember that there were whole towns that were depending, whole massive communities depending on maybe a coal mine or a shipbuilding company. And so if you look at this picture here, it says many workers went on strike about the changes. There was a massive coal mining strike at the time in the 1980s. So that might be something that you might want to do your own research on as well. And remember to include that in your answers. It was a time of huge change. So the decline of traditional industries in the 70s and 80s had a huge impact on working class communities. Like I've just explained, if you shut down a coal mine, the whole village or the whole town, or let's say, I don't know, 70% of the town might work in that industry. So everybody was, trying the best to get a job, and they weren't there. I said there was widespread unemployment among the working classes. Do you remember I said a few videos ago where like cheaper houses were built close to factories and industries? So it could be somewhat like a whole street of terraced houses might all work in the same place. So everybody would have been unemployed at the same time, or out on strike at the same time. So it was a massive impact on these communities. It says in many working class communities, most men relied on a single industry for work. If that industry couldn't provide jobs, the whole community was left unemployed, like I've just said. Many people had to sign up for benefits known as going on the dole. Okay, so they had no prospects. Teenagers that were leaving school had no job to go to. Like in the previous generations, it would be, I'll get you a job in the same either factory or in the same coal mine or in the same shipbuilding company that your dad and your uncles worked and your grandparents, and all of this was changing now. So unemployment led to an increase in depression and crime rates. So people had no money because they couldn't work. They were getting a tiny amount of money in comparison on the dole, and because of that, the people turned to crime. And if you link that with in the last video about imitating characters from films and television, like gangsters, that's all they had to look up to. That's all that they felt. That's all they knew about. So those people in the working classes were looking towards gangsters as, you know, an idol. So let's look at the character of Mickey. Mickey represents the many working class men who became unemployed in this period. He loses his job, signs onto the dole, and despite 3 months of desperately searching for work, he can't find anything. This begins his descent into depression and prompts him to turn to crime. Now, we're going to look at his education later on, but the education system was split into middle class and working class, and very often they didn't offer academic qualifications to be able to get out of the cycle of unemployment. So we've got to assume that Mickey doesn't have any qualifications to be able to get a decent job. He's, you know, an academic job, which should we say. And because of this, his mental health suffers, and he falls into a depression. He's desperate at this point, and when Sammy asks him to help him to be a lookout in a crime, he's kind of like, what else can I do? He's got a baby, remember, at this time with Linda, and he needs to be able to get some money to feed his family. So this is what happens. So there was a strong class divide in Britain, very divisive Britain at this time. Even before the industrial decline, there was a sharp divide in Britain between the working class and the middle class, and the decline made it worse. Lots of working class parents struggled financially, even if they were in work or on the dole. Many people find it difficult to afford even basic things such as food, clothes and heating. However, the middle class were largely unaffected by the industrial decline. Many of them didn't work in industry. They had jobs like teaching or accountancy instead. Those who did work in declining industries were running them, so they were the bosses. So they had transferable skills like management and could get new jobs. Remember, these management would have been to a grammar school and would have got academic qualifications. So they were in a better position than the working class to be able to gain another job. There was also a class divide in education. Many middle class parents could afford to send their children to private school. Often private school led to university and a well-paid job, as it does for Edward. And by contrast, for most working class children like the Johnstones, university wasn't an option. They needed to work when they left school to support their families, and they became stuck in the same low-paid jobs for life with little opportunity to progress. So the universities wouldn't allow you to go there if you were from a secondary modern. You wouldn't have had the academic qualifications that was offered to you if you were at a grammar school. So let's have a look at the character by Mr. Lyons. Mr. Lyons shows no compassion towards his secretary, Miss Jones, when he fires her. His own job as the factory manager is secure, so he simply dismisses her by saying it's just another sign of the times. Okay, so he must have done that so often, he becomes numb to actually firing people. He doesn't see, he doesn't understand the consequences of of firing her. And a secretary, even though it's a respectable job, it is one of the working class jobs. Okay, he knows that his position is secure. He's the one who's running the business, and he needs to make cutbacks to be able to make it profitable. And his own secretary, Miss Jones, is a consequence of that. So you need to remember this key quote. It says, the same answer everywhere, nothing. Okay, so reading these pages, you can kind of understand why Mickey loses his temper with Edward at Christmas. Edward thinks signing up for the dole will be easy because he's never experienced what it's really like. Okay, so he's got no understanding of how the other half live. Edward is one of the working class, and he's had everything easy. He's never had to have any disappointments to deal with in his life. However, Mickey, he gets really short-tempered, and he loses his temper with Edward because he doesn't understand. He just doesn't get it. Okay.